In this clip, I'm going to go ahead and add some detail to the cliff. So here I went ahead and actually polished out most of the cliff here, and it's looking pretty good. I'm really happy with the silhouette here. So if you look from every angle, you get nice sort of curve. But just before I move on to the details, I'm going to go ahead and select my move brush. So I'm going to click BMV and just going to go in with the big move brush here and just going to move it a bit and trying to get nicer curves here. So that's something I do usually towards the end, and you can grab a bigger one here. So what I'm trying to do here is trying to achieve that sort of nice curvy line, so nothing is too straight, nothing is too perfect, and it just gives a little bit more character to this cliff. So just move this here. I like the idea of the center, the bottom bit not being at the center, but being slightly at the side. I'm not sure if I like this, so I'm just gonna move that down a little bit. Move those out a little. Give this a highlight. So that's something I do towards the end. This side here is a little too flat, so I'm just gonna select a smaller brush here. And just move it out a little bit. Here we go. It's starting to look really good now. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually start adding cracks here. So I'm going to start with a little larger size, and I'm going to try and sort of define these little crevices here. So I'm trying to make little breaks in the line and just give a little bit of a shape definition here. So I'm not trying to overdo it because I don't want it to seem like they're actually cracks. I want them to look more like, natural sort of lines within the rock. At the same time, I'm trying to define individual pieces of rock here. So just like we sort of removed it originally, but now I'm putting it in, but because I'm using sort of very sort of rigid lines here, it will create more of an effect that it sort of connects together, but in a much more organic way. And I can always go in with the smooth peaks here and just clean up little bits to make it a little bit more organic here. Maybe a little bit of H polish as well. That's pretty nice. And I'm gonna select the orb crack again. Just gonna go in and try and give it a bit more shape here. So I'm gonna go in here. And again, I'm just free flowing here, trying to just come up with ideas as I go along. More here. And again, you don't want to overdo it. You just want slightly, very subtle effects here. So I'm just going to go in a little bit here. Just sort of creating those natural cracks and crevices in the stone. A little bit more here. So I'm just going to go in and do one side for now, just to keep the video a little bit more shorter. A little bit here. This line here. So whenever I see too much softness, too much flat space in one spot, I just want to go in and add those cracks. Here we go. Maybe a little bit more here. And so the idea is right now I'll probably add a little bit too much. What I can do later is remove those in a certain areas, and that way we'll create a bit more organic feel to it. So that's pretty good. And now I can add a little bit more vertical lines. So I can even go in a little bit deeper here. It's a bit too much here, so I'm just gonna remove that and just go in. And I'm trying to sort of use the pressure sensitivity here to really enhance the size at the and on the corners, but then have it a little bit more thinner in the edges here. And these straight lines really good for just breaking the geometry down a little bit, making it look a little bit more worn and, as if it's sort of collapsing on itself a little bit. We can even go in and add some traditional cracks as well. So we can select this part here and just create another line over here. It's looking pretty good. So now you can see it's a little bit over the top. So what I would do now is I would select the orb flatten brush and just go in, perhaps decrease the intensity here and just go in, flatten those in a little bit, just so they look a little bit more like they fit in there. And using smooth peaks, just break them in a little bit. There we go. A little bit more here. And that's very much a technique I use quite often, is just adding a little bit too much and then removing it a little bit, then adding a bit more and just going back and forth until I get to the perfect level of where I want to be. That's looking pretty good. These are a little bit too much, so I'm just going to clean that off a little bit here. Don't like this part, so I'm just going to clean that. Starting to really look good. So I don't like this part at all, so I'm just going to go in and clean that. And another thing I'm going to do is just going to select the AJ polish brush here and just going to go in and give them a little bit more shape to these crevices over here. So don't want to keep any sharp corners. If something was broken off, it wouldn't really have much sharp corner here. Just gonna go in and clean that here a little bit. Perhaps just gonna remove this part a little bit more. Not sure if I like this part here. So I'm just gonna clean this off here. And again, I just cleaned this part off here. And now, as you can see, these lines are a little bit too sharp at the end, so I can go in and break those off. Another thing you can do is just use pinch brush here and just pinch it a little bit right here. It's pretty good. And again, this is sort of way more tedious process, and because it's a big cliff, you do want to spend quite a bit of time here. Just gonna select the planer brush and orbs flatten brush here. Just gonna get those cracks back in a little bit. Yeah, because it's such a big piece, you don't really want the cracks to be too big or too strong. You want them to be quite moderate. That way it wouldn't look out of scale. Go in here. And again, another place where I should use smooth peaks a little bit, just to clean these shapes off. So I'm using this curvature shader here, so I can see the curvature a little bit more than it should be. So if you were to bake this down, it wouldn't actually have these harsh lines here, but it helps me to see what the curvature map would look like. And I very much love using the curvature map on the cliff bakes. It really helps selling the shapes a little bit more. So always trying to make sure that my curvature map would look nice and clean. Here, there we go. So that's really coming together now. So as you can see, these kind of cracks really work. As I noticed, the vertical lines on this particular shape are a bit less useful, so I'm going to perhaps get rid of a lot of them. But just really highlighting those cracks here, and again using the smooth peaks a lot to get rid of unnecessary shapes. So that looks pretty good here. This is not really good, so I'm just gonna actually go in here and clean this off. And again, as I said before, it's very much just back and forth process. So I oftentimes just do something and I think it would be a good idea, and then it turns out not to be. So I kind of go in and clean it off. And whenever I clean something off, as you can see, it always leaves a little bit of a after effect here, and that after effect sells as its own thing. So that's pretty good here. I like this. And not sure if I'm liking these shapes here, so perhaps I'm gonna get rid of those now. And I'm gonna grab the orbs crack, and as I noticed, the horizontal lines really sell on this shape, so I'm just gonna go in and add a little bit of those instead. And they don't have to lead somewhere, you can always just add a little bit and just end it right here. That looks pretty good. maybe one bigger one here because there's a crevice here. And I'm also oftentimes trying to use that looks pretty good actually, I love that. I'm always trying to use the shape of the actual rocks to guide my cracks and guide my lines, because whenever something has like a corner or something like that, it would make sense for a crack to start there. It wouldn't make sense to start a crack, you know, just in the middle here, because it just doesn't look natural. You want to make sure that your lines are always sort of, you know, somehow highlighted by the actual mesh. And again, I'm gonna go in and I'm just gonna go and play with those horizontal lines because I think they look pretty cool. Again, another one here. Don't want to overdo it, but in the same time, I am trying to sell this idea of a huge cliff here. So the more smaller little cracks I have, the more the scale idea sells here. And again, I'm just going to clean back a little bit. And this is pretty much the most time-consuming part of this process here. This is looking really good. I really love the texture here, and I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of the stone. So this is pretty much it for this module. In the next module, we're going to look into creating stylized trees.